Two Dutch girls went hiking in Panama. Then they vanished without a trace. Weeks later, their backpack and camera were found deep in the jungle, filled with photos and phone calls that made the mystery even more terrifying. What really happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon? Kris was 21 years old, from Amersfoort in the Netherlands. Lisanne was 22, an applied psychology graduate, and the two had been close friends for years. In April 2014, they were staying in Boquete, Panama, a small mountain town surrounded by dense cloud forest and steep jungle trails. They had not arrived in Panama on a whim. They were in Panama to volunteer with local children and had been learning Spanish, exploring the area like many foreign visitors did. On the morning of April 1st, 2014, they began a hike on the El Pianista Trail, a well-marked and frequently traveled route that tourists completed regularly without incident. Around 11 in the morning, they decided to continue on their own. They were seen smiling, carrying a small blue backpack with a camera, their phones, and a bottle of water. That was the last confirmed sighting of either woman alive. The final daytime photos showed Kris and Lisanne reaching the summit of the trail. But after that, the images changed. They continued walking beyond the point where most hikers turn back, deeper into the cloud forest. When they failed to return that evening, concern began to grow. But what happened over the next several days made the mystery far more disturbing. Their phones started making emergency calls. Again and again, attempts were made to reach 112, the European emergency number, and 911. The calls did not connect, but they were logged. Whoever was using those phones was alive, trapped somewhere in the Panamanian jungle, and trying desperately to get help. Days passed, then weeks. On June 14th, nearly 10 weeks after they disappeared, a local indigenous woman found a blue backpack on a riverbank. Inside were both phones, Lisanne's camera, cash, passports, and personal belongings. The money was untouched. The backpack was dry and remarkably intact. And then, investigators found human remains. Some of the bones showed unusual bleaching, and Dutch forensic experts later questioned whether the deaths were as straightforward as the official explanation suggested. But the most haunting evidence was still inside the camera. Alongside ordinary vacation photos were 90 photographs taken in complete darkness during the night. Flash after flash illuminated wet rocks, jungle vegetation, fragments of clothing, and terrified faces surrounded by blackness. Those images did not explain what happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. They only made the mystery darker. Those 90 photos taken in pitch darkness, do you think Kris and Lisanne were trying to document something? Or were they using the flash to signal for help? Drop your answer in the comments below. Because the camera wasn't the only thing recovered from that riverbank. And what came next raises even darker questions. The last daytime photos Kris and Lisanne took were captured at around 1 p.m. on April 1st, 2014. They showed the two Dutch women on the Pianista Trail, smiling and appearing completely fine. Then, suddenly, there was nothing. No more photos, no successful calls, no signal of any kind for nearly 12 hours. And that silence has never been explained, not by Panamanian authorities and not by the independent investigators who later reviewed the case. Whatever happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon during those missing 12 hours, whether they became lost, fell into a ravine, encountered someone, or became hopelessly disoriented in the jungle, there is no record of it. That gap sits at the very center of this mystery. Just hours after the last known photo, one of their phones attempted to dial 112, the European emergency number. The call failed. More attempts followed, including calls to 911, Over the next several days, investigators would log 77 emergency call attempts. None of them connected. But the phones revealed something chilling. Someone was still alive. At first, both phones were used. Later, only one remained active, and eventually the wrong PIN code was entered multiple times. The phones were not left on continuously. They were switched on briefly, apparently to search for signal, and then turned off again to preserve battery life. That behavior did not seem random. It seemed deliberate. Then, at around 1 a.m., the camera came back to life. What followed were 90 photographs taken in complete darkness, flash after flash, over the course of several hours. The final image was captured shortly after 4 a.m. After that, the camera was never used again. The photos showed wet rocks, dense jungle vegetation, fragments of clothing, and occasional glimpses of faces illuminated by the harsh flash. They did not clearly show where the girls were, what had happened to them, or why the photographs were being taken. Were they trying to document something? Or were they using the flash as a desperate signal for help? The official investigation only deepened the controversy. Panamanian authorities were criticized for moving too slowly and for failing to properly secure whatever scene existed in the jungle. Dutch investigators later pushed for a more thorough review, but the official conclusion remained accidental death, most likely caused by a fall, drowning, or exposure. Yet the evidence was far from complete. When a local Nabe woman discovered the blue backpack nearly 10 weeks later, it contained both phones, Lisanne's camera, passports, money, and personal belongings. The cash was untouched, and the backpack was surprisingly intact. Nearby, investigators recovered only a small fraction of the girls' remains. Where the rest of the bodies went was never established. Dutch forensic experts also noted unusual details in some of the recovered bones, including signs of bleaching and possible cleaning. The official ruling did not change. Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon entered the Panamanian jungle on an ordinary April morning. What came back was a camera full of darkness, a handful of bones, and 77 unanswered emergency calls. And for many people, the most unsettling question is not how they died. It is what happened during the 12 hours when the trail, the phones, and the camera all went silent. More than a decade has passed since Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon disappeared on the Pianista Trail, and this case is still far from settled. The official explanation says they became lost in the jungle and died in a tragic accident. But for many people, the evidence does not fit together cleanly. 77 failed emergency calls, a backpack found intact beside a river, unusual forensic details, and 90 photographs taken in complete darkness during the final known hours of their lives. Were those photos a desperate attempt to signal for help? Were they documenting something they wanted someone to find? Or do they capture the final moments of two young women who realized they were not alone in that jungle? We may never know. And that is what makes the disappearance of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries of the modern era. If you found this case disturbing, let me know your theory in the comments below. And if you want more true stories, disappearances, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to Pinpoint Mysteries, because every place has a story, and some stories refuse to stay buried.